Sometimes a person's more unpleasant memories are among the most important to who they are, because they so often create defining moments. I don't look on my middle school or high school years with fondness, but I know I would be a very different person without them. For those of you who support me on Patreon, I wanted to make sure you had a clear picture of progress, so I wanted to make the first official Patreon video purposeful. An observation I've made about many topics in regard to the religious debates that occur these days is that those on the left sometimes have limited understanding of what education is like in private religious schools in poorer areas, and I sometimes observe people seemingly failing to recognize certain narratives. For example, I've heard the Amazing Atheist express confusion at who takes Ray Comfort or Ken Ham videos seriously. Though I assume those questions are rhetorical, there is a real answer. Children do. Having 7 years of private religious schooling, I believe I can help bridge the gap in understanding this phenomenon. I'm going to be referencing a few videos, so I'll try to link them all in the description box down below. In many cases in the United States, regulations for private schools can be rather loose, especially with religious schools, sometimes waiving requirements that would be on a public school, or requiring material but not requiring that it's scientifically, historically, or medically accurate. John Oliver did a segment in regard to sex education, where he pointed out dramatically different medical requirements, and young girls were being educated that they were like used gum once they lost their virginity, and he made a joke about it not being an acceptable state for history.
Perhaps the most poignant question was, will this go well for me? Because after looking into sex ed programs this week, the answer depends quite a bit on where you live. There is no required standard for sex ed in this country. In fact, only 22 states mandate that kids receive it, and only 13 require that the information presented be medically accurate, which is crazy. You wouldn't accept a history class not being historically accurate.
This isn't just confined to sex ed. Depending on where you are and what school you go to, this can affect history, science, health, biology, etc. I was told mental illness didn't exist, and they were demons trying to torment a person, and mental health care was something of a joke. Depression was caused by sin and lack of Christian values, and psychiatrists were scam artists. It seems some have developed an impression this sort of thing only happens to Muslims, or not in the United States, and there's a general animosity that disrupts conversation and prevents the situation from being fully comprehended. A reason fundamentalists will sometimes make statements like, most scientists are young Earth creationists and evolutionism is only believed by a fringe group of pseudoscience, or statistically Christians are a minority in America and are very oppressed, is because they may be told that verbatim in school. I still have some of my old papers, and I'd like to share some of them with you to help bring clarity to this. I've selected some from my middle school science class, and I'll try to address some of the more common points. Let's begin with a Bill O'Reilly soundbite from Potholer 54 video.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that.
Yes, David Silverman's face says it all. Did Bill O'Reilly really say, tide goes in, tide goes out? You just can't explain that?
I'm keeping the documents in the background for all this to lessen the need to pause if you want to read it, but it's basically a science quiz about recognizing why science is fallible compared to Scripture. I'd like to draw your attention to the final statement: no one can fully explain how the moon stays in orbit. The reason someone can say, tide goes in, tide goes out, you can't explain that, is because you may learn that in science class. Science and people can't explain things. Only the Bible can. This is another science quiz. Let's read 8 and 9. Science and theories are not always accurate. What is always accurate? The Bible. List the 3 possible categories in judging the accuracy of a scientist's observations and theories. If it contradicts the Bible, it's wrong. If it agrees with the Bible, it's right. If it's not discussed in the Bible, it could be either. When I was 12, I was taught this was the basis for the scientific method, checking information against the Bible and ruling it as right or wrong based on what the Bible said. I was told scientifically the Bible had always been proven right, was the literal basis for all scientific fact, and there were no discoveries that contradicted the Bible that were actually factual. Any claim of such a discovery was just cases of evolutionist propaganda, and I was quizzed and examined on this basis. This was also the basis for being taught mental illnesses didn't exist that I mentioned earlier. I'd like to play a soundbite from a Messianic Manic video about transitional fossils.
Creationists act as though they want to see a fossil not just for every single species between now and the beginning of life on Earth. They act as though they want to see a fossil for every single generation. They won't be satisfied that human beings evolved unless you show them their grandfather's bones, their great-grandfather's bones, their great-great-grandfather's bones, and so on, all the way back to Australopithecus.
He makes the point in the video that the fossil demands are unrealistic and serve more of a propaganda purpose. And I'd agree in case of many for-profit institutions, but I'd like to add that if you attended private religious schooling, you may believe it's a very reasonable demand. I was told all skeletons fossilize unless damaged, such as by cremation, so expecting fossils for every generation was reasonable. And because there weren't billions upon billions of fossils, that was further scientific proof young Earth creationism was right and evolutionism was wrong. In the background, you'll see one of my science quizzes in which the correct answer is that science proves creationism and disproves all evolutionary ideas, as the answers for questions 9 and 10 respectively. Something that people don't seem to grasp about a lack of a requirement that information be taught with scientific, historical, or medical accuracy is that if the school can teach inaccurate information, they can also enforce that information as the factual answer. I'd like to show you one of my science tests in which the true or false category contains a question about people being peer pressured into believing evolution, and creationism being accepted by fact, and evolution being accepted by faith, being the respective correct answers on the exam. If I were to disagree with these points, my answers would be marked wrong and I'd fail the test. So to provide a bit of context to Oliver's segment on sex education, here's a handout I received in class in regard to young girls getting abortions and being allowed medical coverage without the parents' knowledge. We were supposed to encourage our parents to do something about this problem. If a young girl was told she's like used gum once she's lost her virginity and she contested that point, she could be failed out of irrelevant classes and may need to take summer courses or repeat the grade, which may not be considered a bad thing for protecting Christian family values. She would grow up to get married and manage a home, so it's really not an issue if she's held back a year. A woman's not going to do anything with an education. I had to deal with some of that mindset in 8th grade when I took a cooking class. I received a bit of ridicule when I, a male, expressed an interest in home economics and cooking. That was woman's work. A man didn't need those things. I was one of 3 males in the entire class, one of whom dropped out a couple weeks in, though people stopped complaining after they tasted my snickerdoodles. But I'm digressing. I'll discuss corruption more in a future video.
It's the same reason that Richard Dawkins doesn't go and debate creationists on evolution, because the facts aren't up for debate. Evolution happened. It is a fact. That's why Richard Dawkins doesn't debate creationists. And if he were to debate creationists, it would just be to correct their misapprehensions.
My point is people don't seem to understand how far private and religious school exemptions can go in areas that are more lax about it, and it's apparently not common knowledge. It's not an extremely common occurrence, but I had science exams that said evolution has no evidence and is believed only by faith. There is no science to support evolution. All science supports creationism, and not accepting that would result in failing. So when a fundamentalist says something like, I want all the fossils, it's not necessarily because they're trying to lie or they're trolling. They may have learned in school all bodies fossilize, so if evolutionism was true, there'd be billions of fossils everywhere. I was told man-made pollution had no effect on the environment or climate change in my science class, and in Bible class the girls were told they'd be judged on how obedient they were to their husbands, and I was told I would be judged on keeping my wife obedient to proper Christian family values. I hope this video can help bring a bit of clarity when it comes to understanding what's going on inside the mind of the fundamentalist, since it seems a lot of people don't really grasp these education differences. You may say Ken Ham videos are silly, but the person may have been shown Ken Ham videos for years in middle school or elementary school. Their entire understanding of science will have been based on that narrative. It took me about 9 years to undo what I had been taught, and that came at high personal cost. Many of these people are likely still in the earliest stages or haven't even begun. So hopefully this video provides a bit of insight, and helps people understand the gaps that can arise when these things are discussed. And I hope it helps people in better understanding these issues. Thank you for watching, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.